Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I get to sit down with Amir Kats. Amir is an award-winning conductor who currently is in his 7th season as conductor of the St. Paul JCC Symphony, his 5th year as the orchestra and band teacher at Blake Middle School in Hopkins, and the first-year conductor of the Roseville String Ensemble. Amir and I talk about the importance of arts in the schools, what it's like to lead one of the oldest community orchestras in the U.S., and how he manages to juggle it all on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Amir Kats, thank you for joining us this week on the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So right now we are sitting in the orchestra room at the Blake School in Hopkins, where you are the orchestra teacher, conductor. What do you teach here at Blake?
I teach both orchestra and bands classes.
Okay.
In the school setting, orchestra specifically means strings.
Okay.
String instruments with bows, so violin, viola, cello, bass.
Okay.
And then you've got band, which is the various woodwind, brass, and percussion instruments as well.
Okay. So what did you play growing up? I assume to get to this point you had to be some sort of musician as a kid.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
I grew up hearing music. My mother is a pianist, both performer and teacher. Her mother was as well.
Okay.
So I grew up hearing piano at home and started tinkling away at the piano since I was probably 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And then starting in elementary, middle school, I started studying with varying degrees of seriousness, violin and clarinet, studied piano in more depth. So, yeah, clarinet and piano I would call my principal instruments.
Okay. And so you've been here at Blake, you were saying before, for 5 years?
I'm finishing my 5th year.
Fifth year. And also you are the conductor of the St. Paul JCC's community orchestra.
Yes.
And how long have you been doing that for?
I'm in my 7th season
Okay.
with them. Started in the fall of 2012.
Okay. How did you first get hooked up with the JCC doing that?
That was interesting. They had an opening. I don't think I was even aware of it, but a member of the orchestra, I think the most senior member who's been there since the 1960s, Ed Rappaport, who he started in the 1960s as a high schooler, playing first clarinet and then viola in the orchestra. He's an acquaintance, he's a friend, he's a neighbor. We're in the same congregation. And he told me that they were looking for someone, or maybe he told them. I don't even remember exactly anymore.
Yeah.
But they reached out to me, and here I am finishing pretty soon, this coming June, my 7th season with the group.
Is it a rarity that the Jewish Community Center, not necessarily, we're not talking about a huge city. This isn't like Chicago, New York, LA.
Right.
This is St. Paul, a lovely community to be sure, but it feels like this is something that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see at a city the size of St. Paul. Is that right?
I think it is a rarity. When the orchestra was founded, and it's now over 90 years old, I don't believe it was specifically affiliated with the JCC.
Oh, okay.
That happened later. That would have been under their founding conductor, Peter Lisowski, who, he's been gone for a while. I never had the honor of knowing him. But our most senior members did play under him when they were in their younger days, and he was towards the end of his career. And so I think it was under him that the orchestra moved to the JCC. And if I'm not mistaken, yes, to answer your question, I believe it's the only Jewish community center in the country that specifically has a community orchestra affiliated with it.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's got to be a pretty neat thing to be affiliated with, such a rarity in the country to have something like that.
Yeah, and it has some interesting impact then on our programming, because we do some more kind of traditional Western European classical orchestral fare. In fact, I'd say we do a fair amount of that. But we've also had some different kinds of programs that featured more of a Jewish aspect.
Okay.
So, for instance, a few years ago, there's this amazing cantor based in New York City, Yitzchak Meir Helfgott, who, he's recorded CDs with the concert violinist Itzhak Perlman. He's a big deal.
Okay.
And we were able to do a performance with him a few years ago. He flew in, he did some kind of traditional cantorial stuff, some amazing music from around turn of the last century that's written specifically in kind of this mix of an orchestral style and a cantorial style together, and not stuff you hear every day, not stuff that's performed too often. And it was an amazing experience. June a year ago, marking Israel's 70th birthday, we had the Israeli singer Shuli Natan come and perform with us. She's the one who first performed Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold, back in the days leading up to the Six-Day War.
Oh, sure.
And the first time she sang it, I don't know that she even knew what that song was going to mean, what a big hit it was going to be, but she happened to premiere it on the day that President Nasser of Egypt started moving troops into the Sinai, and you started to have the build-up that led towards the Six-Day War a few weeks later, and so the song became kind of and the night she premiered it, Jerusalem was still a divided city, Israelis in the west, Jordanians in the east, and so it spoke very much to people's hearts. Anyway, here she is now, 50 years later, still, very fine voice. She's in her early 70s now, and she came in and sang the tune with us, as well as some other traditional Israeli and Jewish tunes, and it was an incredible evening.
So when you're trying to prepare the orchestra that you're conducting, it's obviously a great honor and thrill for both, I'm sure, you and the orchestra and the crowd to have a singer like that come in. How hard is it to prepare for something like that when you get the time with just the orchestra and you can do it? You go through in the rehearsals and you have them ready, and then you have this variable that they don't get to rehearse with until it's time. How hard is that to prepare for?
It's challenging. It can be scary. I think the scariest moment I had was when we prepared for Cantor Helfgott a few years ago. First of all, the music that we were preparing with him, it was complicated music. It was music where there were a lot of spots where you just kind of had to wait and see how fast or slow he would take something, or he would change the speed. And I kept reminding them in rehearsal, we'll have to listen for him here, we'll have to see what he does there. So we were already kind of nervous. And then the first time I met him was on the day of the performance. He flew in that day, walks in the door 5 minutes before rehearsal is to start, gives me a friendly hello, and then says, "So tell me again, which tunes are we doing tonight?" And at that moment, time kind of stands still, but you just have to be very professional about it and just say, "Oh, well, I spoke with your manager, and we're doing such and such, and we're doing this, and we're doing that, and we're looking forward to it, and let's get going." And it turned out to be a huge success. But on our side, the orchestra just has to be as well prepared as possible. They have to know their parts cold. They have to know how to listen for each other and just be used to listening to each other and following me, so that the only variable that they have to adjust to then is what the singer might do. And we build in a little bit of extra buffer rehearsal time when the singer does come in.
Okay.
And it's always a little scary, but these singers are professionals, and when you're working with a professional, they generally have a way of singing so that they're also actually relatively easy to follow.
So how do you take the lessons that you learn working with this orchestra in St. Paul and the professionals that come in? How do you take those lessons and translate them to teaching here at Blake and helping these students get to, maybe they're at the level they want to be at, or the level they're just going to be at, and maybe there are some who want to take their musicianship to a higher place than where they're at now. How do you teach those lessons that you've learned and picked up from these terrific musicians along the way?
Well, what I think you're trying to do at any level is to create committed music making, expressive music making, and just where the group knows how to function together. That's just a lot of moving parts. And while the skill levels may vary between adults and younger people, in a certain sense, the problems are the same in just that sometimes the moving parts just aren't lining up, whether it's literally that people are playing at the exact microsecond that they're supposed to, or that they don't know who they're supposed to listen for, and then how they should adjust their sound accordingly, whether they should be stronger than the other person, blend in, be softer than the other person, where they need to breathe. In the case of string players, what part of the bow they're using and how much bow speed they're using, because all of those affect the final product. And again, that's true whether you're talking about someone who's only been playing for 2 years and is playing a simpler level of music, or whether you're talking about an adult, be it amateur or pro. So those issues, they may appear at a different level, but they're all the same issues. And so I think it's largely my job to analyze what's going on and to say what exactly is the issue here that's going on. What is it that the player needs help and support with in order to make all the moving pieces fit together?
Yeah, that's a lot going on with, I've seen orchestras on stage. I can't play music to save my life, but you watch them on stage and there's so many pieces that pull together and make work seamlessly. It's kind of, as somebody who knows nothing, it's incredible to watch.
Well, it's a gradual process.
Sure.
It's a gradual process, and at the student level, when you also are talking about just building basic playing skills also, and they may feel more dejected when something isn't sounding, frankly, good at all at first. It's the teacher's job to kind of keep in mind, again, where you can get to, how to get them from point A to point B. Right. It's also important with these students just to remind them that all the mistakes that happen along the way are part of the process of learning. Something that my students have heard me say a lot is, I said, when you were learning to walk and you were falling more often than not, your parents weren't saying, "Oh, my kid is awful at walking." Your parents were saying, "Oh, my kid is learning to walk," and gradually there's going to be less and less falling and more and more success. And I tell them it's the exact same thing here with either learning how to make a sound on an instrument or learning how to put together your part together with other people's parts so that you make beautiful music.
So you also conduct in the first season with the Roseville
String
Ensemble. How did you get hooked up with them, and how do you balance all of the sort of orchestral responsibilities you've taken on?
Those are two very different questions.
Fair enough.
As far as how I got hooked up with them, I was very fortunate. A member of the orchestra who, like most members of the orchestra, they don't play for a living. They're doing something else for a living, but this is something they do out of love, out of joy. And this particular orchestra member takes violin lessons, with a professional in town, Aaron Jantz, who's a member of the Minnesota Orchestra violin section. So, a top flight professional. And she mentioned to him, our conductor is retiring and we're looking for a new conductor. And Aaron happened to know my work and suggested to her, "Hey, you might want to check out this Amir Kats guy." So really often in the conducting world, actually, we're not talking about two cases where it's a matter of people knowing your work. Okay, and I guess that's true in any profession, but maybe more so in conducting than in some other jobs. It's not necessarily that resumes are sent in always, and the kind of the traditional kind of stereotypical approach to posting a job and then accepting applications. There is some of that as well, but I think in the conducting world, there's arguably more of an aspect of what kind of reputation are you creating for yourself so that people know your work and hopefully speak well of it and word gets around.
And because of, it's a pretty specialized type of job. There can't be that many people out there that can do what you do?
It's a specialized job. There's not one even ironclad way of getting into that profession. It's not like, say, law, where you finish your undergrad degree, you go to law school, you take the bar, whatever. There's a prescribed way of doing it, and then you apply where there are openings in law firms. Right. It's not like that. It's not like that. There are conducting degrees you can get in school, and I did do that, but still then a lot of it is luck, as well as making luck for yourself by working hard and, again, creating hopefully a favorable reputation for yourself. And yeah, that's how it is. So you're right, it's a rarefied profession, and there's not one traditional career path.
So what brought you to Minnesota? You were telling me before we started that you were born in Haifa, and
the family came to the States for collegiate studies for the parents, and then for professional reasons ended up staying in the States. And what was the question again?
What brought you to Minnesota?
What brought me to Minnesota? So
I mean, your parents dragged you here, but
right. And then I was working largely with youth symphonies.
Okay.
And previously I had been working with the Albuquerque and Santa Fe Youth Symphonies in New Mexico. And then a position opened up here in the Twin Cities with the Greater Twin Cities Youth Symphonies. And after doing that for a number of years, I decided to make a change in direction. I wanted to go into the schools instead and have more consistent contact with students.
Okay.
And thus I've been at Blake now for 5 years, but also working with these adult groups. So I get both the challenge and the satisfaction of building up the young people, but also working with adults who can play professional level repertoire.
Is it challenging as an artist to see sort of the direction that arts in the schools are taking, where you're getting less and less opportunity in the school, and you need these it's great that there are outside groups like the Greater Twin Cities Youth Symphony Orchestra and other organizations where talented kids can play, but you don't get as much in the schools anymore, and I got to think that's a little bit frustrating as somebody working in the schools and with that, in the academic sense.
It is frustrating. I think for one thing, you just try to run the best program you can so that people understand the value in it. One advantage we have in Minnesota, actually, as far as the public schools go, is open enrollment. And a message that I've seen conveyed to school boards, and that I had myself had conveyed to school boards at times of budget cuts, is that if the school board cuts music programs disproportionately, people will take their kids and the tax dollars that go with them to another district that isn't cutting in such a draconian way. And school boards take notice of this. I've seen them take notice of this message more than once. And like I said, it's not just me who's giving this message. All kinds of parents have stood up, and students, at meetings and told them, hey, this is an important part of why we are in this district. We value the music program. For many kids, it's the best part of their school day. It's something they look forward to. It provides them a different kind of learning and expressive outlet than their math class or English class do. Not that those aren't hugely important.
Sure.
And administrators happily are, I think, in many cases, getting the message. But you always have to advocate. If you were to even bring up the notion, the hypothetical of cutting English from the schools, people would look at you like you're crazy. So those teachers, I don't think, have to worry. But arts teachers, part of our job intrinsically is advocacy.
Yeah. And there's so many studies out there that say that arts in the schools are beneficial, academically to kids in the sort of the core class sense.
Yeah, and there are increasingly not just small scale, but also large longitudinal studies that are demonstrating that as well. And so it's important to convey the results of those studies, again, to the decision makers.
Well, the students here are certainly lucky to have an advocate like yourself, and frankly, the Twin Cities community, lucky to have that, because it's clear that there's a need in the public schools here. Last couple questions we have for you. Favorite Jewish food?
Oh, geez. Let's see. Favorite Jewish food. Is there just one? I mean,
almost never.
Almost never. I mean, if it's a really good quality bagel, with the lox and cream cheese and all that, that's a real welcome one. I do like gefilte fish if it's well done. I don't know if it. We were actually having a discussion the other week. We had 2 different brands of gefilte fish during Passover, and we were arguing over which one was better. And actually, I think they were both from Kedem, but they were from different years.
Okay.
Those things keep amazingly well as long as you don't break the seal on the jar. Anyway, I like the ones in the smaller jars. They were smaller, but they're lighter colored. They had a milder taste. That's
okay. That's your choice there in gefilte fish.
That's my thing. Yeah, and actually for a sweet treat, and I don't get these too often because they're expensive. But have you ever had krembo?
I have not.
Okay, krembo, which literally means there is cream in it. It's this treat that is sold in Israel only in the wintertime.
Okay.
It would melt in the summertime, and in the summertime there's ice cream anyway. But it's basically like a little vanilla cookie, and then you have kind of a marshmallow filling on top of it, and then the whole thing is covered in a thin layer of dark chocolate.
Okay.
And I think it has a European origin, but anyway, it's made its way over to Israel, and it's totally sweet, overly sweet and unhealthy, and you could find it in a few places in town. I recommend it highly.
Okay.
I've seen them at Kosher Spot in St. Louis Park. I've seen them at Cooper's on West 7th and St. Paul. So, yeah, krembo.
Okay. And favorite Jewish holiday?
Favorite Jewish holiday? I think, that's a good one. But I think Hanukkah. Okay. I think I like it a lot. It doesn't have the restrictions that some of the other holidays have that we observe in my family, and our boys love it. There's so many songs, and we're a musical family.
Sure.
Not just me, but my wife. While she's not a musician professionally, she has a lot of musical training. The boys love music, so all the songs that go with it. The boys love the candle lighting, so it's something that we can share together. So, yeah, I think I would put Hanukkah at the top of the list.
Plus, when you have kids that are young, you do the presents, you sort of see the fun of the holiday through their eyes. It's pretty enjoyable.
It's great.
Well, Amir Kats, thank you very much for joining us. The St. Paul Symphony Season Ender, we will have a link to it in the show notes. You can get information. Go check it out. Amir, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Amir Kats for joining us this week. As always, if you have not, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. If you have suggestions for people who should be on the pod, please email me. You can get me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. We appreciate all your suggestions. Thanks again for listening this week, and we'll see you next week.